Thank you.
I've got this fancy microphone that makes me feel like I need to start dancing up here and doing a concert presentation with lights and
You can dance and I'll just stand.
exactly, fireworks. Mackenzie's good at fireworks, I understand too, right? So I thought we'd talk a little bit before we get into the license renewal, just about the government shutdown. You may have heard something about that going on in Washington, and it really is kind of a curious situation that we go into work every day in Washington hoping to be able to do something. But for us FCC type attorneys that are used to filing documents with the FCC, calling the FCC attorneys and processors to make sure applications get done and moved along, and to find out issues that broadcasters may have on political broadcasting matters or other things. And there's nobody there at the FCC unless you happen to be a TV broadcaster dealing with the repacking after the incentive auction, that they've got money out of the incentive auction to fund those people to continue to operate. Otherwise, the FCC is essentially shut down. The commissioners are there. There are a couple of people in enforcement to do things that are important to lives, property, and emergency situations. But applications are not getting processed. So if you've got a situation where you want to buy or sell a station, it's on hold. You got a situation where you want to move a transmitter site, it's on hold. You've got any sort of situation that you'd normally be going to the FCC to get something done, and it's all on hold. You know, some say that it is really a preview from some folks who don't think the government really is necessary of, hey, maybe we can live without this government. Let's show how that all works. You know, at some point, though, there are people that are really beginning to feel the problems. People who do want to sell stations or make moves who just can't get those approvals that are necessary from the FCC. You know, we also see that nothing happens on other policy issues that the FCC should be dealing with. Most of you I know are radio broadcasters, right? And one of the big issues for radio broadcasters that's coming down the pike is the potential for more ownership changes, possibly deregulation of radio ownership. In December, at the December FCC meeting, the FCC had proposed to start a rulemaking to look into the possibility of changing the local radio ownership rules to allow broadcasters to own more stations in their market, to consider the NAB proposal that basically gets rid of radio ownership rules outside of the top 75 markets, to allow you to own up to 7 FMs in the bigger markets and an unlimited number of AMs is what the NAB has proposed. That's on hold. The comments are due 60 days from when that order is published in the Federal Register, but the FCC doesn't have the money to pay the Federal Register to publish that item. The Federal Register is also very limited in what they're able to publish during the government shutdown. So that 60-day comment period hasn't started, and the rules to be, any change in the rules are going to be pushed back because the process can't start to take comments on those rules. Even the appeals of various FCC orders, like over a year ago, a year and a half ago, in November of 2017, the FCC changed the rules on, for instance, TV ownership, newspaper broadcast cross ownership. All those are on appeal. The briefs on the appeals from minority groups who are challenging the changes in the rules that allow newspaper broadcast cross ownership, TV radio cross ownership, and some changes in the TV ownership rules. Those appeals, the actual briefs were filed right before Christmas by the appellants. The response from the FCC is due February 14th. The guys who are writing the response aren't there. They've been furloughed. So they'll be asking the court to push that February 14th date back even further, and that may also have ramifications on the radio ownership rule. But perhaps the most incredible thing that the shutdown did, and that kind of leads into our discussion here on radio license renewal, was to shut down the online public inspection file for broadcasters. Now, in past shutdowns, the FCC has, so that everybody feels the pain, shut down everything, shut down their website, shut down all their databases, so that people couldn't get any information about what was going on at the FCC. This is sort of a shutdown light. It's like they're making up the rules as they go along as to what they'll leave open and what they won't leave up and operating. They decided to leave the FCC's website up and operating. They're just not updating it, or not updating it much, because they are putting auction-related and emergency-related information up there. They've left a lot of the databases open. So if you've got a mod application or a transfer sale application, you can go ahead and file it. It's just not going to be processed. It's not really going to be officially accepted until the FCC reopens. If you've got a pleading to file, even though the deadlines have all been suspended except on auction-related matters, you can go ahead and file those pleadings, but none of those will be considered as having been filed until the FCC reopens. A couple of databases were shut down, I guess because they needed a lot of intensive monitoring, like the international branch, if you happen to be filing a satellite Earth station application, that database was shut down, and a couple of others. But for some reason, the FCC shut down the public inspection file database, which is the database that the FCC, once they put it there, it's for the public to look at. It's for you guys to upload documents into. It's not like the FCC's got to maintain it once they've put it up there. But yet, for some reason that they haven't explained, it's been shut down. So that lots of the deadlines as to when things should have been put into the public inspection file have effectively been put on hold because you can't get to the public inspection file. It strikes me also as being kind of ironic that here the FCC adopts this online public inspection file to make it so much easier for citizens to see what you as broadcasters are doing by being able to access your public inspection files from the comfort of their own breakfast nook in their pajamas and fuzzy slippers with a cup of coffee. They can go online and look at your quarterly issues programs list, look at your EEO public inspection file reports, look at all the applications that you filed recently, look at all that data in the public inspection file. And yet, they shut it down. It was more accessible when it was in paper.
Yeah, we can't even do our ABIP inspections. I mean, when we go out to do an inspection now, we can look at all the station logs, we can look at the files that are available, we can go to the transmitter site, but the online public file is totally unavailable to anybody doing an inspection. We can look up and see your license on the CBDS, but again, we can't look at your license in the online public file. So it's affected everybody all the way down to the station level and the inspector level for this particular shutdown. Very bizarre. Is the only way to describe it.
John, do you think that will create, obviously, an inevitable backlog, but then I'm sure they're not going to extend the timeline for renewables?
Well, I hope, we don't know. This could go on for months, but we hope that it'll be solved within weeks instead of months. It delays inspections. Though we can do the inspection, we just can't issue a certificate until we see the online public file. If you have documents that you have to upload into your public file, children's reports, quarterly issues and programs, which were all due January the 10th or before, those will be done within 24 hours after that public file is opened back up. But until that time, we advise everybody to keep a paper copy available, or at least an electronic copy, so if somebody did show up at your station, you could certainly show them that information. The same thing for the political files. If you had a local sheriff's race or some type of local race, you still have to maintain that political file. So those documents, while they can't be uploaded to the online file, you still have to make them available for anybody who would show up on your doorstep. So keep that in mind.
Right. The rest of the public file, all the quarterly issues, programs, lists, EEO reports, and that sort of thing, do not need to be made available to the public when the FCC site is shut down. Political broadcasting documents do, however, theoretically need to be made available if any candidate wants to look at them. So in most cases, at this time of year, it's not too much of a big deal because there aren't a lot of races going on, but I've had a couple of calls about things like sheriff's races or special elections where there's a vacancy on the city council or something and the municipality is holding a special election, or even some places that are having municipal elections in March of this year where political broadcasting is starting in local communities, and technically stations should be keeping a paper version of their political file because that is mandatory, even though the rest of the public file is not mandatory to be made accessible to the public when the public file is shut down. So it is a crazy situation in Washington that we hope will get resolved sometime soon. Nobody in Washington has any idea as to when that will be. And we watch the news the same as you do every day, and we hear probably some of the same rumors that you hear every day, and there doesn't seem to be a clear path out of this. But hopefully it will all get resolved in time for the license renewals at some point later this year. Somebody made the comment to me that technically the fiscal year that we're arguing about ends at the end of September. So that on October 1st, this shutdown will be over because we'll be in the next fiscal year. Of course, if they don't agree on a budget bill, we could have the next shutdown beginning on October 1st, and effectively it wouldn't make any difference, but at least this shutdown can only go through the end of September. It's a theoretical matter. But let's talk about what we're here to talk about, and that's getting ready for license renewal, and particularly about the impact of how the online public inspection file will affect you all as you're filing your license renewal and as the FCC is processing those license renewal applications. I've got the PowerPoint here, being the lawyer, with all the detailed issues and topics that I'll talk about. John is here to provide the color for the real what's going on the ground that he sees from his routine inspections of stations during his ABIP inspections. So the license renewal cycle, now that it's gone to an 8-year license renewal cycle, you kind of forget about it. Back in the day when I started, it was every 3 years, so it was almost a constant process because it is a 3-year license renewal cycle. There's a group of states that will file every other month their license renewal. It goes through 3 years, and back in the day, once one cycle would end, the next one would begin. But then in 1996, the FCC was ordered by Congress to adopt instead an 8-year license renewal cycle. They've kept the 3-year cycle, so every other month there'll be a group of states that will file their license renewals. Stations in a particular state will file their license renewals. That'll go on for 3 years, then there'll be 5 years essentially of silence where everybody forgets about license renewal, and then we pick up again. So we're coming to the end for radio of that 5 years where everybody has forgotten about the license renewal process. And in June of this year, for stations in Maryland, DC, Delaware, Maryland, DC, Virginia, and West Virginia, the license renewal cycle starts. It then goes to the Carolinas in August. We have September off. October is Florida, along with Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And then you guys in Georgia get to file your license renewals for radio on December 1, 2019, on or before December 1, 2019. Your friends in the TV industry are just 1 year behind you, so they'll be filing here in Georgia on or before December 1, 2020. Now, everybody should remember December 1st. It's my birthday. So you can all send me your present at the same time as you're sending in your license renewal applications. Technically speaking, the license renewal, the license itself expires 4 months later. So here in Georgia, your license expires actually on April Fool's Day, April 1st of 2020. But that 4-month period in between is what the FCC uses to process your application, to decide whether or not you should get a license renewal. There is a 90-day public comment period that runs from the December 1 filing through all of December, through all of January, through all of February till March 1. The public has the opportunity to file comments saying whether or not your license should be renewed. We'll talk about in a little bit how you have to give notice to the public to remind them that they've got this opportunity to file comments. Isn't that nice? You get to remind the public that they can come tell the FCC why you shouldn't get your license renewed. You know, one thing that says is, not that you don't do this all the time, but think about the public and think about what you're doing on the air over these next couple of months, because they are very crucial. Be extra sensitive to community groups that come in and complain about something that's happened on the station. Be extra sensitive to providing coverage of events that people want to have covered within their communities, because if anybody gets ticked off at your station now, it's the worst time for that to happen, because they will be hearing announcements saying, hey, if you don't like what's going on this station, not quite in those words, you can file comments with the FCC in Washington about the license renewal. And you really don't want to encourage that, because when there are complaints, applications can sit around forever and ever. And we'll talk in just a moment about some of the problems that raises if applications sit around because there are comments that are filed. So even though we're 10 months in advance of that December 1 filing date, you really don't want to wait until November 28th or 29th to start thinking about this process. First of all, there's public comments, notices that you have to be running 60 days in advance, but also you use now to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to be doing to meet the obligations at license renewal time. Looking at the issues now gives you time to correct some of the problems that may exist. In particular, because of the online public inspection file, you're going to get a lot more scrutiny than license renewals have gotten in the past. One of the issues that you have to certify to, and we'll talk about the requirements for certification, but one of the obligations that you've got is that you certify to the completeness of your public inspection file. In the past license renewal cycles, for anybody to question that certification, they had to physically get up, get in their car, drive to your station during normal business hours, go look at your public inspection file, and see whether all the documents were there. Practically speaking, that never happened. You know, and occasionally some journalism class at the local college got sent out on a mission to go check out local public inspection files and see if they were accurate. Occasionally a competitor got ticked off at you and came and looked at your public inspection file. But practically speaking, nobody came to look at the physical public inspection files. Now these online public inspection files, as I said earlier, are available to anybody looking at them at any place, at any time, sitting there over breakfast in their pajamas and fuzzy slippers with their cup of coffee, looking at your online public inspection file at their leisure 24 hours a day, assuming the FCC is operating and got their website up and operating. But they can object. And not only can people anywhere look at their public inspection file, but so can the FCC. We've already seen situations where the FCC, back in December, sent out a bunch of emails to stations and lawyers for those stations and engineers for those stations. Anybody
that's ever filed with the commission got a letter.
Right, anybody whose email was ever associated with a station got a letter saying, hey, we're from the FCC and we were thumbing through your public inspection file and we noticed that your quarterly issues programs lists were missing. And that went out to a couple hundred stations. It was not an email that went out to everybody who had problems, because I frankly know of stations that don't have accurate online public inspection files with quarterly issues programs list who did not get that email. But it, I think, was just a shot across the bow from the FCC warning people, figuring that guys like me who write a blog, broadcastlawblog.com, if you don't read my blog, there's my commercial message. Check it out, broadcastlawblog.com. To write an article saying, hey, these messages have all gone out. And it was picked up throughout the other law firms' blogs. All the trade press picked up the fact that this was going on to try to warn a lot of broadcasters to get this stuff in order.
Well, a letter that went out, too, that I happened to be privy to a couple of the letters, wanted an answer immediately as to why the public file was not complete. The quarterly issues and programs were the main documents, and what the station was going to do about it. So it really set stations up that didn't have quarterly issues and programs or didn't have public files, that they had to respond, and they also have to keep that certification honest when it comes time for license renewal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But it was a really serious letter that went out. And as I mentioned earlier, anybody who had filed on behalf of the station ended up getting an email. I mean, I've seen CPAs get them, engineers got them, attorneys, of course, consulting, anybody who had ever filed either in the past or even in recent times. Even if they didn't own the station anymore, they got an email. So it was pretty widespread. Yeah, Bob.
I'm sure you'll comment on this later, but the only thing worse than not having your public files in shape is to lie about it.
Yes, definitely.
In fact, that's the two bullet points down right here. That one of the things that the license renewal makes you do is certify to a lot of things. It doesn't require necessarily the filing of lots of documents for the most part. It just requires that you've taken care of preparing certain documents. You've done certain things at certain times. You are in compliance with certain FCC requirements, including certain technical requirements. And if you make those certifications and are not in compliance and have not done the things that you're certifying that you can do, that's what we'll talk about in a few moments, called a misrepresentation, which is the worst thing you can do that theoretically could lead to the loss of a station license.
How many of you have looked at the online file and paid attention to the column that's on the right side of the page? You see a bunch of dates. Anytime anybody files any information for your particular facility or facilities, it puts a date there for the general public to see. So if you're a day late, they're going to know it. It's documented. It's permanently documented. We can go in and look and see if you file late. So that's something you have to be very, very careful about.
And the other thing to consider about how controversial and how many issues could be raised about license renewal is just the tenor of the times. I mean, it is a very political time. There are lots of activist groups arguing against deregulation in the broadcast industry, and there certainly has been lots of deregulation under the current Republican administration at the FCC. Lots of stupid rules have been gotten rid of, but some folks don't like the fact that there has been a lot of deregulation without any sort of balancing commitments put on broadcasters to continue serving the public interest. And so you may have public interest groups out there, because the public inspection file is accessible, because they want to make a point about broadcasters who no longer have to have a main studio, no longer have to have any particular studio staffing or community presence whatsoever, to make a point about whether or not you're serving your communities of license and serving the public interest as is required under the Communications Act. They may make a point by challenging a number of license renewals. So it's very important that you follow the rules in getting your license renewals right.
Years ago, if you've been in the business for a long time, you may remember that we had national organizations who were filing against hundreds of licenses. This goes back into the 70s. And we very well could see that again now, because it would be so easy for organizations to go and look at your public file and find missing documents or lack of providing good service to the community in as far as they're concerned, and they could file against your station because of that.
Now, I do need to note that as we talk about some of the specifics of the license renewal process, to some degree there's a little bit of guesswork here, because there will be a new form, or at least there's supposed to be a new form used for the license renewal. And it's not a new form in terms of the questions that are being asked. Instead, it's a new form in terms of the database being used. Normally, broadcasters have filed in the CDBS database, especially radio broadcasters. As you may remember with the biennial ownership reports last year, broadcasters suddenly had to radio broadcasters suddenly had to start using LMS, which is a different database that TV has been migrating over to much quicker than radio. And a lot of broadcasters had problems operating LMS, getting their biennial ownership reports up there. This license renewal is supposed to be filed in LMS. Now, the form has not been uploaded to LMS. It's not available there to work on. There was actually supposed to be a Communications Bar Association meeting next week in Washington to talk about the new LMS form. That's unlikely to be happening because of the shutdown and the fact that the guys who are doing this migration are furloughed. So we won't know the details of that LMS form probably for at least another couple of weeks, or a couple of weeks after the shutdown ends. But that's something to keep in mind, that this will be filed in LMS. There may be some new questions, new nuances on some of the old questions, or just it's a new procedure and a new physical way of doing things that may take longer than just filling out the old form in CDBS that most radio broadcasters are familiar with. Now, obviously, we're not spending all this time here just for the heck of it. It's because the license renewal process is an incredibly important process. That essentially, if you don't have a license, you don't have the authority to operate stations. And every year, every license renewal cycle, there are some stations that just forget, that aren't members, that probably aren't people watching this video or sitting here in this room listening to me drone on about the license renewal process. They're probably not members of the GAB or other state associations, but probably should be, because they just don't pay attention and miss the license renewal filing deadline. And sometimes don't even file at all. And there have been a number of cases where operating radio stations